I'm going to talk about vicarious trauma. I would like to start off with, get a pencil and paper, because this is going to tell you where you're at. And I'll tell you what by the time the thing is over, I'll tell you what it means. So what I want you to do, it's fun to do this. I want you to write down, you list your first favorite animal. And then I want you to write down your second favorite animal, your favorite time of the day. Also, you were sitting in an all-white empty room. There's absolutely nothing in the room. It's all white. And what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Write it down. And the next thing is, you are in the Amazon jungle. What is the first feeling that comes to your mind? That's the fun piece. Now, this other part, this is just write down the number between 1 and 5. 1 is rarely, and 5 is frequently. And we're going to go through symptoms of vicarious trauma on the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual levels. We're starting off with the physical. So write down a number beside what you experience on a regular basis, besides anyone that might be out there that might have medical things that gives them some of these. If it gets worse, you still put a number beside it. Headaches, neck and shoulder pain, lower back pain, knee and ankle pain, changes in sleeping habits or eating habits, lack of time or energy for self, digestive or elimination problems, and frequent illnesses like colds and maybe bouts going to the doctor, those kind of things. And the emotional symptoms, again, write down a number from 1 to 5. Feelings of being overwhelmed and overburdened, numbing. I don't know if you know there is such a thing as emotional numbing. I'm not talking about people that have to shut down emotionally to cope or to survive. Numbing emotionally means that you're just not feeling anything. Distancing from people or clients, or if you have clients, those kind of things. Intrusive images. Sympathetic magic. That's identifying and taking on another person's pain. We take on their energy because we're so sympathetic. I don't do sympathy. Look it up in the dictionary and see where it sits between. I can tell you where it sits between, but I'd be rude, so I won't. Frequent depressive moods. For no reason at all, you might feel down. You might not want to get out of bed. You might just feel depressed. Everything around you might depress you. The mental symptoms, diminished ability in problem solving. Again, put down the numbers. Diminished ability and awareness to meet physiological needs or psychological needs. Diminished ability to view self or others from more than one perspective. Diminished ability for empathy. Diminished ability for a sense of humor. If you have one, all of a sudden it disappears, you're going to miss it. Everybody around you is going to miss it. Diminished ability for boundaries. Diminished ability to make self-protective decisions. They're the mental ones. And the spiritual ones. General disruption of inner peace. Again, go from 1 to 5. Feelings of grief, despair, or guilt. Loss of meaning. Feelings of emptiness. Feelings of abandonment and betrayal. Disconnected from inner experiences and resources. Now, these are for your own awareness to sort of take inventory on yourself. It's a really good way to gauge where you're at and what you might want to do, because dealing with trauma day to day increase your risk of vicarious trauma. And I've already went over all the signs, so I'm going to go over the definition, because vicarious trauma affects a person that feels indirectly or vicariously through another person or anything that might be going on in the world. It's very common among some professionals, especially healthcare workers, lawyers, and counselors, anybody in the mental health field, as we've noticed with the virus for the last 2 years. An awful lot of mental health people have been extremely traumatized, and that's all vicarious trauma. Actually, I've worked with some of them, and it's they just don't know what to do. They're just totally burnt out. So it's a type of trauma that can cause mental health issues like post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. Now, what it does for people who already have post-traumatic stress disorder, it brings it up in them even more. And it employs where it's like a person experienced vicariously. It reminds them of their own trauma. It'll bring up their own trauma. It'll create anxiety. It'll create fear. And even if you never had trauma in your life, you're lucky. That's what I would say. You may not have had it directly, but you may have had it indirectly by witnessing. A lot of people grow up in households witnessing trauma, and that sometimes is just so traumatizing, I guess you would say. And how you're learning how it affects you. And psychologically it affects you, because it can appear in many different ways. I mean, you definitely can have trouble trusting people after you see the harm that they're capable of. Feel hopeless and depressed, because sometimes no matter how we reach out and how many people we try to help, nothing changes. Or sometimes the hopelessness and depression comes from feeling hopeless around the trauma that you're experiencing vicariously, especially on a world level, because there's no escape anymore. Technology is so advanced that we know every little thing that's going on. I was talking about the hopelessness or the depression and feeling helplessness. We can't do anything for people. We feel that. Avoid, and also the other thing is procrastination, avoiding doing what we're supposed to do, being tardy, distracted, looking for any excuse. These all can be symptoms when they're brought to another level. Worrying constantly about whether you're doing enough to help others. We're always doing enough to help others. Who's at most risk for vicarious trauma? We all are. Some are more exposed than others at it. You have medical care people, disaster relief people, mental health people, all of the above. Everyone on this panel that works with people and that's trying to help everybody else, that's looking at on the world stage, so to speak, you might say. So again, I'm going to repeat that you can have, oftentimes you have multiple things going on, especially police. You have a lot of public servants. We have an awful lot of people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. And any of us that are not suffering from post-traumatic stress, we're still exposed to the vicarious trauma, and both groups needs to know where, again, if you're hypervigilant, constant fear of death, disassociation to cope, you can have depressive episodes, which I mentioned earlier on, that if we understand that vicarious trauma, we can understand it as a form of empathy mixed with anxiety. It sort of helps our brain connect with the pain and the fear from another person in their situation. We can understand, if we're doing that we are living through somebody else's trauma. And then we begin to think it's going to happen to us as well. If we don't think it, we fear it. Because that's what the imaginative part of our brain creates, that emotional connection of that fear, which is what contributes to experiences vicarious trauma. The other thing, if we tell people we understand exactly what they feel, we think they're validating them, when actually we're traumatizing ourselves through their experience. I can tell you from experience working with people, and they've taught me everything I know. They want us to listen to them. They don't want to hear from us that we know how they're feeling, because the truth is we don't. We're not experiencing what they're experiencing. And the truth is we don't want to experience what they experience. That's part of putting up the boundary and knowing I can sit, I can listen, I can validate them. You can understand to a degree where they're coming from, or by validating them as much as saying as that must have been a terrible experience for you, because now you're letting them know you believe them and that was a real experience for them. Because they're the important things. People just really want validation. They want to know if we hear them. But you're more vulnerable to vicarious trauma if you have a personal history of it. Heightened empathy, trouble recognizing your own emotions, because if we're very traumatized, it's much easier to recognize somebody else's emotions. Lack of support from anywhere, or lack of information or knowledge around the subject. Not being aware. Anyone that's experienced vicarious trauma, I would definitely suggest that you put it into your search engine and find out all about it, because it makes a huge difference when you are knowledgeable about it, because knowledge is power, and it gives you more power over your well-being.
Well, I have a question, OMENA, whenever it's appropriate.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm feeling like people will be thinking vicarious trauma, that has to do with, say, my hearing from a grandparent maybe about what they suffered during the Great Depression, or how, say, a mother or a sibling talking about being assaulted in some way at some point. And it can happen that way, but can't it also happen because we're sitting here watching, say, a news report about people getting their homes bombed in the Ukraine or wherever, Palestine, etc., and you and I have repressed or suppressed memories of being at war in other lives, and it brings up that trauma. You know what I mean? Is that vicarious trauma?
Absolutely. It's all vicarious trauma. Anytime you're looking at something, hearing something, even watching a movie or listening to stories, if it invokes a feeling in you and it's uncomfortable, then it's bringing up trauma. Usually we can discern when it's only a movie. But if there's any hidden feelings in there, it's going to stir them up. Because what's going to happen, you're going to get up and turn off the television and say, I can't watch this anymore.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a high imagination, I have a very high imagination, and I'm sure a lot of us does, you can imagine yourself being there in the bombing and trying to save your children or your family or whatever it is. That's vicarious trauma. Okay?
Yeah.
And then anytime you can feel, this is where our empathy sometimes goes over the boundary. So we have to learn to have boundaries where my boundary is God bless them. That's how I protect myself, because that stops me from going there, because I can bilocate there. I will do that to do healing work. But initially you don't get it. You're not thinking healing work. You're thinking of the trauma, what it's doing to the children, what it's doing to everybody, what it's doing to the families. Okay. And that's where you have to learn to put a boundary up there, and you just send the love and the light. And remember, it's not the soul's reality. The pain is there, the suffering is there, but that's not the soul's reality. When a soul is released from all of that, it's more joyous. But that's not something you really can tell somebody when they're going through that pain. They don't want to hear about that because their pain is real. to them. It's real to me if I'm going through it. Telling me that, but anything else just doesn't do it. But what we're going to have out of this is a lot of people with PTSD. A lot of people are experiencing it all, and a lot of people that have trauma. They're going to re-experience the trauma through flashbacks or nightmares. It's got to come out somewhere. And if there's any of those or negative thoughts and feelings around trauma, such as blaming ourselves for incidents of feeling numb, sometimes we feel guilty because we feel nothing. Well, the numbness is a sign of vicarious trauma. I mean, sometimes you're just going to be numb if you listen to the news every day. I would suggest don't listen to the news every day, and watch a funny movie or
I
something.
agree.
Yeah, something that something that sort of makes you laugh. And the arousal after trauma in the forms of insomnia, irritability, anxiety, and so on. Sometimes we walk around don't even know why we're irritable. Some people are anxious all the time because they don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. That's all hypervigilance from trauma. And then you upload it, you're downloaded, I should say, more from what's going on with all the rest of the world. And sometimes with your neighbor next door. Some people just freeze because they don't know what to do. And it's really, really difficult. An awful lot of people are left homeless because of what's going on today. And that's in our country alone, never mind some other country. We don't even have a war going here. And you have an awful lot we have different wars, and you have an awful lot of people that are being homeless. That's all stress, and it's post-traumatic stress, because you never know when you're ever going to be safe again.
If you enjoy listening to my audios, please like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to my YouTube channel, email me your concerns and questions at omenacenter777@gmail.com. Call me at 860-871-6076. Please leave a message for an appointment and someone will get back to you in 24 hours. Thank you.